Bonjour, balalo. I'm the Moonlit Page Turner. Grab your treat, grab your tea, and let's talk books. For this month's read, we are traveling to the Central African Republic. Just like most countries in Africa, this area has been inhabited for thousands and thousands of years, but when we're talking about the Central African Republic, the modern day country, this has been around since really like the 1960s. So, just like the name suggests, it is smack dab in the middle of Africa. It was part of a French colonial rule that they were established in the late 1900s, and then they will fight for their independence and gain their independence starting in 1958, and then they become fully independent from France in 1960. Following that, there's a lot of political upheaval, which we will talk about in our second read. So I do have two reads for us today, one fiction, one nonfiction. So let's get into it. Right before we get into this month's read, let's get into this month's treat. These are called Benne Wafers, and they are a like flat sesame seed, toasted sesame seed cookie. They kind of remind me a little bit of Florentines. It was difficult for me to find a recipe for this because it's Central African Republic. A lot of the food recipes I got were from the surrounding Central Africa region. So these take about 5 minutes to cook. I will tell you that they burn very easily. I have burnt a couple of them, but the outsides are crisp, but they are chewy, and they do have sweet because they have butter and brown sugar in them, but ooh, those are dangerous. Okay, for our first read, this is Co-Wives, Co-Widows, and this is by Adrienne Yabouza. It's fairly short. I really liked this book. It is about co-wives who become co-widows. So we have our main character, I would say, is Ndongo Pasi. That's the first wife. And then we have the second wife. Her name is Grek Bao, I think is how you pronounce it. But they are both married to Lindau. And Lindau is 49. And he's very successful. His family gets along. He's getting a little up there in age, though, and so he can't quite keep up with two wives. So he starts taking some medication, which is implied, but not fully said in the book, causes him to have a heart attack, hence the co-widows. Once Lindau dies, his cousin comes in and tries to say that the wives killed him and take over his building, as well as the housing complex that they live in, and kick these two ladies out. Now, both women have children. The law kind of gets involved, but not quite. So the cousin, who is the disaster, like, he is the biggest villain. He locks the house up, and Ndongo Pasi, like, kicks open the door, grabs their stuff, and they end up getting out of there. They do try to fight it in court. Some success, but not really. That's the part that's super infuriating in here, where there's a lot of injustice. But that whole time, these two women are together. They have a pretty good friendship for being two wives of the same man. They do separate and go to their respective parents' houses, so they are separate and their kids are separated. And then we do see a happy ending. I'm not going to spoil it here. I do recommend picking this up. It's goes pretty quickly, and just the whole book was lovely. I mean, obviously, there is the villain and the cousin. He does get his just desserts at the end, but you're going to have to check it out to find out. The second book, this is nonfiction, so this is a memoir, and this is My Country, Africa. It's the autobiography of a Black Pasionaria, and this is by Andree Blouin, hence her photo right there. This book is a little bit of a thicker book. Took me a little bit longer to get through because this book kind of infuriated me a little bit. It's such a sad story. Her life is just tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, and she really fights hard for a lot of the things in her life. We do see the very last chapter of the book is written by her daughter, and it talks about what happens to her life after she's kind of forced to leave Africa. and sad. So it kind of starts sad. It definitely ends sad. Her life is kind of dominated by the certain men in her life, which gross. But for her is important because her parents, we're going to start there. Her mother was 13 when she met her father, who was 40. This reminded me a little bit of the I'm Not Your Eve book that I read from Blouin, which has a lot of, in this case, rich older Frenchmen, sometimes rich, sometimes not rich. Her father was very wealthy, and hence her mother was actually engaged to someone else, but he was kind of out of the country, and so her mother's father, her grandfather, agreed to originally it sounded like for them to get married, but then you find out that they're not actually married, which is why it reminded me of the I'm Not Your Eve story, where they came for these African wives and then they would get married or were already married in another country. When Andree is 3, her father has already married or remarried at this point to a white Belgian woman, and she didn't have any children, and so Andree's mother kind of lords that over. Her name's Henrietta, and so Blouin makes it really sound like Henrietta is the one that forces her father to make the decision to put her in an orphanage, although she has both parents. Her mother could have easily taken care of her, and she could have stayed with that part of her family. And that separation at the age of 3 really sets the stage for her whole life, because hence it's called My Country, Africa, and she is struggling her whole life to kind of fit into Africa. She's like, look at this amazing country. This is my country. And she ends up going to other countries within Africa, but she really sees it all as one, and she's searching for that identity because she is mixed. And they call it métis where in the region that she's in. She goes to this orphanage. It's awful. They barely feed them. They feed them like sardines and crackers, and they just teach them how to sew. They don't really get an education. She's so malnourished that she's eating clay off of walls. It's pretty gross. When she starts to get older, she even lies about getting her period so she can be separate and fed more. But when she does eventually become of a marriageable age, she is kind of engaged to this boy that she doesn't want to marry, but they're like, you're not going to have a better life, so you better marry him. So she decides to run away. At this point, she does successfully run away, and she goes to live with her father. That does not bode well with his wife, who comes back and forth from Belgium. And so she's like, okay, I'm causing an issue here. I will move out, and I will, try to be independent, because she learned how to sew. She's going to be a seamstress. That causes her father to disown her. And she's 17, I think, at this time. So she moves in with her mother. She works night and day being a seamstress to take care of her mother, which is kind of what she's doing. And her mother's like, well, you should just become somebody's mistress. You're beautiful, and someone's going to like you. That's the easy life. You should do that. And Andree does not want that life until she meets a man named Roger. She goes for a much-needed vacation on a boat. She meets an older white man. This will be, not including her father, who's a huge influence in her life, the first of 3 white men that she has this relationship with that defines her life. Roger will not marry her, but she becomes his mistress, and she becomes pregnant. She ends up going back to live with her mother while she's pregnant, and Roger's like, oh yeah, just send word and I'll come out, when you're going to have the baby. And her whole thing is, are you going to give this baby your last name? Because her father did not, for the longest time, kind of own that with her, and that was a huge contention with the orphanage was run by a Catholic church. And that was a huge part of that, is that her name is different than her father's last name, because it had to be, because he didn't fully claim her. So she's like, are you going to claim this child? And he's like, oh yeah, I'll be there. Because she is part black, she has to give birth in this rundown part of the hospital where she's not given any care, and they're all in the hallway, and basically her mother helps her give birth. to her first child, which is Rita, and he never shows up. He sends someone to see her and her child. Awful. But she'll meet an even worse man named Charles, who's super racist. Why he's in a relationship with her, he does marry her. She has his son, but again, because she's black and her son is black, he is not able to get medication that he needs to survive malaria, and so tragically he passes away. This causes them to get married, which was super bizarre, and soon after that she meets Andree, who is her the third man in her life, and who will have multiple children with her later on. Pretty much right when we meet Andree, she starts to get involved in politics, and that's where this book takes a huge turn, where the book is no longer about her. It's about all of these other people that she's helping to create an independent Africa. And that to me was super bizarre, because it was very her-centric, and then all of a sudden she is a footnote who writes speeches, gets herself kicked out of a bunch of countries because of she is outspoken, puts her life in danger, puts her children's life in danger. And this was another thing that it reminded me of the Let Me Speak book, which was from Bolivia, where that woman was also, speaking for others, and so her children were kind of neglected. We hear very little of her children afterwards. In fact, one time her mother is taking care of her, I think it's her daughter, and they ended up being taken almost hostage, and her husband has to go to get his child. They end up being in separate countries, and so this whole thing of her being abandoned at 3 ends up being reflected a little bit in her own children's life. So for me, I'm like, where is the self-reflect? Because it is not there. We do see the Central African Republic become independent, and really she's pushing for Congo. So she gets kind of kicked out a couple of times in Congo. She ends up in Algeria. Her husband's wife takes her to Madagascar, which they're not in for very long. But she's in multiple different countries that are looking for independence around the same time period. But again, the self-reflection is not there. Eventually, she does end up having to leave Africa, and her husband move to Paris, where they end up getting divorced pretty soon after they leave Africa. And then her life after that is, she's still trying to fight the good fight, but she's very much alone in all of that. But we do see the fight for independence, and we do see kind of the civil upheaval that happens very soon after that between the two people that are running the country. So that, as someone who didn't know that much about the Central African Republic, I learned a lot. But this book was so sad, and then also infuriating for me, because I'm like, girl, you're doing the same things that your parents did to you. Stop it. Stop those generational problems. But I learned a lot, but at the same time I got so frustrated with this woman. But I'm glad that her kids turned out okay, because I was a little worried about them for a while. But yeah, that is my country, Africa. Has the pictures in it, so you can see her and her father's in here. Her and her relationship with her father and mother, to me, is, I don't know if it's just typical of the time, but you can see there's some pictures in there. But she doesn't see them for a large part of the time that she's in the orphanage. But she kind of forgives them very, very easily, because she's still looking for that life. And I would be so mad if you're disowned. That's a picture of her father right there. He was very, very wealthy, and so he got a lot of allowances when it comes to the things that he was allowed to do in the country. He also went and fought during the war, and so he becomes a war hero, and so everyone loves him, but he is a grade A asshole. So read with caution. Very informative, very sad, but I was not a huge fan. Hey, thanks for stopping by. Next month we are traveling to Chad. I'm so sad, Chad. There is not a lot of options to read for Chad. Was looking for something a little bit happier since that last book was kind of sad. So I only have one book for us, but I have a bunch of books coming after that for the next country. If you're interested in what's popping up or things that we've read in the past, please visit us on Goodreads or Instagram. See you then.